The longest World Series drought of any franchise is currently in Cleveland. Can things be changed this year? Let's bring Justin Lott on from Locked On Guardians for a Locked On MLB crossover.
You are Locked On MLB crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, my dog is barking upstairs, and that means it's time for a Locked On MLB crossover. I am the host of Locked On MLB. My name is Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever they're calling it these days, and on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram, and also the best way to get a hold of me is just put comments here. But I'm not flying alone today. Flying in, if you're watching on the Locked On Guardians feed, you already know it, Justin Latta of Locked On Guardians. How are you, man?
I'm doing good, Sully. I'm glad baseball's back. I definitely needed it. I hope you're doing just as well.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I mentioned this the other day. I mean, because January, my city caught on fire, and we were evacuated, and I can't believe, a couple of my students lost their homes in the fire. January was 84 days long, and apparently February was an hour and a half, because I know how that happened. It's like I thought we're in February. Oh, now we're in March. But I'm working hard on the in memoriam video, and we have baseball games on. We have baseball, so that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. How are things going on in the Ohio?
It's cold and snowy. I'm going to escape the cold and snow later this week. I'll be in Arizona actually for Guardian spring training over the weekend for a 3 or 4 day weekend. So looking forward to leaving the weather behind and hopefully bringing some baseball weather back with me.
Oh, hey, let's go through the trivia question. Let's see if you know what the trivia question is. The trivia question I threw out yesterday was there are two players in Major League history in the 4,000 hit club. Who are they? And what team were they playing for when they got their 4,000th hit? Do you know who they are? Big John 08865 and Papa Pops 8 got the question correct. Got the players and the teams they were playing for. Let's see if Justin knows. Who are the two members of the 4,000 hit club?
The only thing I can venture to guess is Pete Rose.
Pete Rose is one of them.
With the Reds? He was with the Reds?
Not when he got his 4,000th hit.
Phillies?
Not when he got his 4,000th hit.
The Royals?
Nope. The Montreal Expos. Pete Rose played half the season with the Montreal Expos. And as an Expo, he got his 4,000th hit. And do you know who the other player was?
Is it Ty Cobb?
Ty Cobb. And what team was he playing for when he got his 4,000th hit?
Only thing I can guess is Detroit if it's not Cleveland.
The Philadelphia Athletics. Ty Cobb finished his career with the Philadelphia Athletics, and he got his 4,000th hit. So when you think Ty Cobb, you think Philadelphia. When you think Pete Rose, you think Montreal. That's where the only two instances of someone getting their 4,000th hit. Pete Rose of the Expos and Ty Cobb of the Philadelphia Phillies. So Papa Palps, you got it right. Ty Cobb with the Philadelphia A's in 1927. Pete Rose of the Expos in 84. Same thing with Big John 08865. And by the way, Big John and I had a little bit of a back and forth on the YouTube comments because he brought up the big C word, the contraction word, which is bizarre because baseball wants to expand. So no team is going to contract, especially with potential labor issues coming up around the bend. There's not going to be a contraction. There's going to be expansion. They just have to. They've only been. It's only taken a couple of decades to figure out the Rays and A's situation, which they still haven't. But this is the longest we've gone without an expansion since the first one. We have not had an expansion since the D-backs and the Rays in 1998.
So we're going almost on 30 years. Wow.
I know. It's been a while. It has been a while. But you know what? It's also been a while since Cleveland has had a World Series champion. Milwaukee has had a World Series champion more recently. The last time Cleveland won, the idea of integration was this newfangled idea, and they beat the Braves, the Boston Braves. It was a different time. But Justin, I want to talk to you a little bit about the fact that we are going to break down what is kind of can't quite figure out the Guardians offseason, but the biggest thing going in the Guardians' favor going into this year is the fact they play in the American League Central. And not that the American League Central is a bad division. They put 3 playoff teams. They had 4 winning teams in their division and the White Sox. But there isn't there's no heads and shoulders great team in any division in the American League. But as a Cleveland fan, which one of the teams that don't play in Chicago makes you the most nervous in terms of pecking at at Cleveland's division title?
I can't say one over the other. I think they all do. They all have their reasons they can catch Cleveland. The Royals rotation was really good last year.
Mm-hmm.
I think they upgraded their lineup. I can't say for sure, but maybe. Bobby Witt's fantastic. Bobby Witt for me is the best player in this division, not named Jose Ramirez. And I know some Royals fans are probably going to say he's better, and I'll listen to that given the age at this point. But the Twins have a good lineup if they can stay healthy. The Tigers have a really nice pitching staff, and they've got a nice little lineup too. And I feel like everyone's just on even footing right now. The Guardians kind of treaded water over the offseason. They swapped some lineup depth for more pitching depth, which is good because they didn't have enough a year ago. But they didn't really act like a team that was trying to win the World Series, coming off a season where they were 3 wins away from going to the World Series. So I feel like everyone really is in the same shallow water here.
Well, I like the fact that Detroit brought back Jack Flaherty and brought in Tommy Kahnle, and they brought in Gleyber Torres. I'm a very big and Alex Cobb for that. Not that I think Alex Cobb is the second coming of Grover Cleveland Alexander, but I'm a big believer in handing the car keys to major leaguers. If you get a chance to put an established major leaguer in your lineup or in your rotation, you do it, because I think that it's basically exactly what the Atlanta Braves. I keep bringing back the Atlanta Braves and what they did when they had to fill in the holes of losing their outfield down the stretch in 2021. They made sure a major leaguer was at every position. You take a look at the Royals. They brought in Carlos Estevez. Is that going to be? And they brought back Michael Wacha. They signed Michael Lorenzen. They brought in a couple of players like that who you're like, okay, you're filling in the spots with established major league players. Of the teams, Detroit's the one that scares me the most. If they had signed Alex Bregman, which I really thought they were going to do, I would maybe make them my pick. They didn't, and I still have a lot of question marks about their lineup. I think Detroit's going to have a winning season. I think unless Kansas City regresses, and we've seen young teams that are overachievers like Kansas City was last year. We've seen sometimes them take a step back. That's if there's a team that could possibly regress of the playoff teams last year, it might be Kansas City. And Minnesota obviously has talent. But of the teams in the Central that I think are the biggest threat for Cleveland to not win the division, I think Detroit's the one that I would be the most nervous about.
You bring up a really good point about not taking that step forward, because I feel like that's the story of the AL Central the last several years, because the Guardians won the AL Central in 2022, which was kind of a surprise, right? Mm-hmm. So they went out and they signed Josh Bell and Mike Zunino in that offseason. Everyone thought, okay, they added power to their lineup. That's what they needed. This is a team that's going to take a step forward and repeat in 2023. Well, they didn't. They struggled and they didn't make the playoffs, and they wound up with the number 1 pick in baseball, which was great for us. The Twins, they won their first playoff series in over 20 years, right? That same year. And then the next year they regressed and Cleveland went back on top in the division, right? The Tigers, I agree with you. I think the Tigers definitely are poised for a step forward. I have questions about the bottom of their order. I have questions about their starting pitching depth, but are they going to be the team? They're very young, right? Are they going to be the team that builds off of last year? Because they spent so much energy that second half, right? Catching up. Are they going to be that team that takes a step forward? Because every year in this division, it's been a team that wins that the next year they take a step back. Development is never linear. Like that's the thing you learn is that the development is never linear. Just because you think that you're going to take that step forward based off of last year doesn't mean you're going to. So that's the question I have for Detroit. Are they necessarily going to take that step? They could, but in the AL Central, nobody seems to ever do it.
That should be the marketing phrase. In the AL Central, nobody seems to do it. Well, when we come back, Justin and I are going to break down. We've hinted a little bit at their offseason. They've rearranged some of the deck chairs on the team. Will it be the right move? We're continuing a Locked On MLB, Locked On Guardians crossover. I do my suffering index at the beginning of the year where I try to figure out which fan bases have suffered the most. And the only reason why for the last bunch of years, basically since the Cubs won, and people who listen to the old Sully baseball podcast remember I was rooting so hard for Cleveland in that series. You would have thought that I grew up in Shaker Heights. Mainly for two reasons. First of all, I just did not want to see Aroldis Chapman on the mound with his arms in the air. And also I felt that Cleveland was the underdog. I felt that they were, I love Francona. I mean, I grew up a big Red Sox fan. Francona was my guy. And I guess my compromise when, the Cubs won, I thought, well, at least the image we have of Aroldis Chapman is him giving up the home run to Rajai Davis. But since that moment, the Cleveland fans have been the most suffering fan base. I think they have been supplanted with the A's being taken away from Oakland. I think the Oakland fan is now the most suffering because, they had the team ripped away from them. But even with that, it's real close. And Cleveland fans have, as I've said before, and I've said to you, they couldn't even win the World Series in the Major League movies, and those were fiction. And so we go into this year, they got to Game 5 of the ALCS last year, and really, they were a hit here or there away from sending it to a Game 6. And once you get to a Game 6, as Arizona showed us a few years ago when they had no business being on the same field with Philadelphia, and they pushed it to a Game 6 and ultimately won the pennant. If you put the Yankees on their heels, maybe something would have happened. They've made a lot of changes for a team that got to within a few games of the World Series. Break down what they did, including the Naylor deal, which I was not expecting at all. Maybe I'm an outsider. Break down what they did and what you think their thought process was.
So when we went to start with the Naylor deal, and I agree with you about the Athletics, by the way, I think that's a good perspective. I would be devastated if we lost the baseball team here, which has been close at times. Let's not forget that
close
either.
to being the New Orleans Indians. This close to being the New Orleans Indians. And Denver, I think, too.
Yeah, my dad told me about that one back in the day. So that'd have been devastating. But so as the offseason started, we fully expected Josh Naylor to be traded. That was the expectation, was they weren't going to sign an extension with him. They typically trade these kind of guys in their last year of their deal. There were some concerns about conditioning. Not that I have any room to talk about anybody's conditioning, but I know Cleveland has to factor that into what they're thinking about. And then as the offseason went on and they traded Andres Jimenez, who didn't have an untenable deal, but if he had another bad offensive year, it was going to be a struggle and the salary was going to start going up. And with the way Cleveland operates, we look at those things. I didn't think Josh Naylor would be traded after that because I didn't see them getting a good enough deal. But as it turns out, they really valued that draft pick, which, of course, Cleveland's going to value the draft pick, right? And they got Slade Cecconi back in that deal, who I think a lot of people are excited about. A lot of people are going to be missing Josh Naylor in Cleveland, don't get me wrong. And I think they're going to miss him in the middle of the order with the power. But Cecconi is one of those guys that it feels like Cleveland will do a lot of good work with. The whole focus of their offseason was they had to find more starting pitching. Right. They were signing, Spencer Howard. They brought in, Darren McKagan off the waiver wire. They were having some bullpen games. Like this for a team that was known as the pitching baseball or the pitching factory. they had a very lack of starting pitching last year. They had to dip in deep and go off the waiver wire. So, they brought in Luis Ortiz from Pittsburgh, which was part of the Andres Gimenez deal. They flipped Spencer Horowitz from Toronto over there, which was a wild 10 hours, whatever that was.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went out and they got Slade Ciccone from Arizona. They added a couple of pitching prospects. They've since signed John Means, who's going to come back in the second half of the year. Hopefully for them, they brought back Shane Bieber, who they're hoping will be there in the second half of the year too, which was their first move of the offseason. And then they went out and added Jacob Junis too to the bullpen, which I was always surprised by too at that point. So the whole theme of their offseason was more pitching, and they replaced Josh Naylor with Carlos Santana, believing that maybe there was some more stability with Santana, someone they are comfortable with, someone they know.
Mm-hmm.
I have a hard time understanding where the power is going to come from, but I think they're looking for gains from Kyle Manzardo. They're looking for gains from Lane Thomas, who they traded for last trading deadline. Hopefully David Fry comes back healthy from his Tommy John and could be a part of that equation because he was a big player for them a year ago. So I think for them, it's going to be, did they improve their pitching enough this season? And can they get some growth out of their own offensive players they already have here? Can some guys graduate? Chase DeLauder's on the cusp. Hopefully, if his feet stay healthy, they have a farm system that's capable of trading for things they need at the deadline if they're in it. And they had to wear off bullpen regression. I don't know if they will. That's a big question. But the bullpen was heavily, heavily taxed a year ago. And if those guys regress at all, if you don't have a starting pitcher to cover it, then they're not going to go very far because that bullpen took them as far as they could go a year ago. And I think that was part of their calculus in getting starting pitching too, is that they know the bullpen's going to regress. That's how bullpens work. They had to protect against it. And I think starting pitching was part of that.
Yeah, someday there'll be an organization that figures out what seems to be so obvious for those of us on the outside looking in, which is one of the best ways to keep your bullpen from wearing down is have your pitchers pitch 6 or 7 innings a game. It's one of the I understand it is not, and I made this point before, and I'm broken record. It has nothing to do with metrics. It has nothing to do with analytics. It has to do with money. The most expensive commodity in baseball are the starting pitchers. So let's create a system where starting pitchers don't go deep into the game, so we don't have to worry about paying them as if they're big, huge superstars. And I mean, that's a big part of why this has happened. Also, a big part of it is no one wants to risk things like, well, we're drafting a pitcher who is smart or does things, tries to use off-speed pitches or curveballs. Everything is just, what's the gun say? How fast gun? He throw fast. And you have people, it used to have, if you have a 100-mile-an-hour pitcher, that was extraordinary. Now that's a middle reliever. And everyone's arms are being ripped apart because your arm's not supposed to do that. But I have an unusual philosophy, and this is crazy and radical and makes me an outlier. But I think you relieve a pitcher, or you relieve the starting pitcher when they need relief. If the pitcher is pitching well, you let them pitch until they need relief, and then you bring in a reliever. And then maybe, just maybe, you're not having relief pitchers throwing 4 or 5 innings a game, and then wondering why everyone's arms are hanging off by one tendon by the time you get to September. I digress. I do like Cleveland's strategy of saying, well, why don't we make sure our starting pitchers can go a little deep? Why don't we just get as many pitchers as we can in here and figure out what happens and figure out a combination here. And hopefully that will work for them because they had a phenomenal bullpen last year. I mean, save for against, there was Clase had a couple of hiccups, but he was, he had thrown, was it 5 or 6,000 innings last year? It seemed that way. And you can't expect him to pitch to a negative ERA for that long. And the musical chair stopped at the worst possible time for Cleveland fans. But you know it's not going to be that good next year. You just know it. We all know it. So I actually admired the fact that they went this route, saying, all right, this is a winnable division. Let's make sure we get as much pitching as we can, the starting pitching as we can, and give it our best shot. But Justin Latta, When we come back, there's something I find really infuriating about Cleveland. And I want to throw it your way because, quite frankly, they should be in the conversation as an absolute pennant contender. And they're not. And it's the fault of the organization. Let's hear from our friends over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it helps keep every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing the Celtics to beat the Cavaliers at a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch free, I never feel like I missed a chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Justin Ladd is here from Locked On Guardians. I am going to bring up something here, and this makes me angry, and it should make you angry. The teams that going into this year's season that have a lower payroll than Cleveland are Pittsburgh, Tampa, Chicago, Sacramento, and Miami. Tampa Bay doesn't have a roof over their head. The A's are crashing on the River Cats couch. The Miami Marlins are a Mickey Mouse organization, and the Pirates are as well. And then you have Cleveland. Look, I think that I'm not a big person saying like, oh, only the rich teams get in, because that's factually untrue. However, if the billionaires who own the Cleveland Guardians raise the payroll, I'm not talking to Mets level. I'm not talking to Dodger level or the Yankee level, as the Yankees tried to make it out like, oh, we're struggling to compete. F you. Get yourself to Minnesota's level, Arizona's level. The famous big market, big spending Diamondbacks. Get to the middle of the pack, and they could be a legit World Series contender this year. There were sluggers this year. I'm not talking Soto. I'm not talking about the big. Why weren't they in on, Anthony Santander? Why couldn't they have been in on, okay, maybe not Alex Bregman, but, why couldn't they have been in on Tyler O'Neill, Christian Walker, Teoscar Hernandez, Pete Alonso when he was kicking around and no one wanted to sign him? Like, what is it about the team that says, oh, we're going to have our payroll as if we are a rebuilding team? I have no problem if a team's a rebuilding team near the bottom of the payroll. I have a problem with the team always being rebuilding or contending like Miami did in 2023 and said, oh, shoot, we better rebuild. This is a team that should be going for it right now. Why can't they get to the middle of the pack? Because that could be the difference, especially in the American League Central.
So 2 points about that, which is really funny. So they're actually about the same payrolls they were a year ago with the signings of Means and Junis, which is hilarious that they ended up, going from 1-to-1 from where the payroll was a year ago. They're actually a little bit below where they finished the season. But I don't disagree with you on that. Their high payroll franchise history is 2018. They were at about $140 million, and that was right before John Sherman bought the Royals. That was the last year he was with Cleveland and partnered with the Dolans, and he went off to buy the Royals. They do have a new financial partner who has the ability to take over the team financially in 2028. But it's David Blitzer, but he owns, part of the New Jersey Devils and some other teams, the Flyers, or the 76ers or whatever it is.
One of them.
So all his money is over those. And there's this whole real estate project that people are talking about that really people aren't talking about, that I think is what's really happening here. But I agree with you. it's like I think this team, the way the front office operates, they are a pretty good front office.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
talked
yeah,
about this on
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I'm not throwing it on the front office. I'm not putting on the people who are holding the purse strings for the front office. Front office is doing a phenomenal job. No. They're using a bottom 5 payroll and turned into a 92 win team that got within a couple of swings of forcing game 6 in the LCS.
Yeah, if you give them $120 million payroll, yeah, don't give them ideas.
Yeah,
If you turn this into $120 million payroll per year, I agree. I think there's a lot more room for error there. I think it's like free agency tends to not do well for Cleveland. Like free agency is a fool's game because unless you're getting the Juan Sotos, out there or the Bryce Harpers when they hit free agency at age 27 or 20, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
The big money guys. Like Cleveland brought in Josh Bell and Mike Sino in 2023, that offseason, right? And it didn't work out. Those two guys were terrible. Those are the kind of problems Cleveland has with free agency. And I'm not against them spending in free agency when they went out and they signed, Matthew Boyd, which worked out last year for the second half. They're going to do it with Means, and they brought back Bieber, and which they wouldn't have been able to do if he wasn't hurt, obviously. And then they brought in Jacob Junis, which I think is a nice. And Paul, I didn't mention Paul Sewald. Paul Sewald was part of this.
Yeah, I forgot about it.
So more good things. They did make some good free agent moves this offseason, I think. But I think for me, with the payroll, it's not keeping your own players. They felt like they had to trade Andres Jimenez because they thought his contract was going to be underwater because he was struggling offensively. Gold glove, platinum glove defender at second base, made $10 million in 2024, was going to make 15 in 2025 or 2026, and then it goes to 25 million. And for a team that does operate on a shoestring payroll, you can't pay a guy who's a below league average hitter that, no matter how good his defense is.
Right.
But that's the problem for them is they sign those contracts like that, and then the second they want to get out of them, then they do. They don't keep their own players. Like they should be extending Stephen Kwan. They should be extending Tanner Bybee right now. Michael Brantley, we're going to go back some time here, but Michael Brantley was the guy they let walk to Houston. They didn't want to let him go, but financially they were told to, basically. They don't keep their own players. So to me, it's not free agency. To me, it's let's keep the guys we developed here. Let's pay them because we know they're good. Like you said, let's make sure there's a major league player at every position. When you keep a Michael Brantley, when you keep a Tanner Bybee, a Stephen Kwan, you don't have to fill those positions externally. Right. You can go out and sign a free agent. You can go make a trade, whatever. So to me, the payroll issue isn't really free agency. The payroll issue is you got to keep the players you develop in-house.
Yeah, that's a great call. And truthfully, at this point, free agency is when a player who is a potential MVP in their prime goes to free agency, it's going to be super rare these days. It happened with Harper. It happened with Manny Machado. It happened with Ohtani. Obviously, it happened with Soto this year. But it's going to be one or two a year. And because most of the time, teams have weighed the pros and cons and said, you know what? We're better off signing our star to a long-term deal early. Like how Kansas City is, wrapped up Bobby Witt Jr. It's like we're better off paying more money now and keeping, so instead of having to, get into a bidding war with the Mets in Los Angeles, you're better off paying more now than later. Cleveland should be a team that's able to do that. And especially for two reasons. It's a winnable division. The American League's a winnable league. The Yankees aren't okay. The Yankees are a very good team. I'm not trying to say the Yankees are a bad team, but the Yankees should not be overwhelming favorites. They lost freaking Juan Soto. And we saw what having Juan Soto in that lineup meant. And they had a lot of their pitchers stayed healthy last year. Granted, Garrett Cole missed about 2 or 3 months, but they got a lot of innings out of some pitchers who you crossed your finger. Oh, I hope we get something from them. And they got Heel, who was the rookie of the year. He shouldn't have been. He should have been our fellow Miller in Oakland, but that's neither here nor there. But they're banking on all that to happen again. And it could, but there's no overwhelming favorite. And so You know this. I know this. If Cleveland gets one World Series title, that will take a lot of pressure off of this team. You know, if they had won that Game 7 in Miami back in '97, or if that Jason Kipnis fly ball to right field didn't hook foul and cleared the wall, Cleveland fans would be a little more relaxed right now. They'd be like Kansas City fans, well, I saw my team win it. Not saying they don't want to continue to win, but you remove that whole, believe me, growing up a Red Sox fan, when they finally won, it's kind of like, oh, I never have to think about all that stuff again. It's glorious. It's glorious. You'll never have to think of Jose Mesa again in your life. And you won't have to think about not sending Kenny Lofton home in that Game 7 against Boston. I can keep going.
You're killing me. Yeah, you're killing me.
I know, and I apologize. I apologize. But you know what? Just keep the players there. Like, free agency is basically like spackle now. Like, you're not going to get a franchise, with the exception of the Soto or Ohtani. Most of the time, it's going to be filling in the tile ground. We need a short-term solution at shortstop. We need a short-term solution in right field. So you give someone a 2 or 3 year deal and you're done with it, because those are the players who are going to get to free agency. So, but you're right. Yeah, it isn't about, you can't rebuild through free agency. You can just do the spackle, but you got to be able to keep your players and create that foundation. And
Lindor.
Yeah, exactly. Lindor should have been in Cleveland forever, and now he's going to be more remembered as a Met.
When he goes into the Hall of Fame, and I think he will, he'll go
probably
as a New York Met. Yeah,
Mike Piazza syndrome.
He didn't go as a Marlin, really?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I just came up with another trivia question, but I'm going to do a different one for. I already have one prepared, but I now have a good trivia question for later. Justin Latta just inspired it. I'll tell you when we get done here in a minute. I will tell you what it is. Justin Latta, let me give you the last thought. What do you predict for your Guardians this year?
They're going to be competitive. I'm not going to predict they're going to win the division again, because this division again is wide open. But I do think the moves they made pitching wise are going to help them stave off like any regression from the bullpen. It's going to help their rotation better. And I do think they have a farm system capable of trading for what they need in the summer. It's just going to be a case of whether or not they get that to summer with enough offense. I think Cleveland fans should expect a lot of 3-2 games, and hopefully they're on the 3 side instead of the 2.
Yeah, I predict they're going to be an 85, 86 win team. I think they're going to be a wild card team. Full disclosure, I am right now, I'm not making my official pick yet, but I am picking Detroit right now to win the division. But I do think, I think that only the 3 games, I think Detroit's going to win the division with 89 wins. I think it's going to be, I don't think there's a 95 win team in the American League, in my humble opinion. So I think there's going to be a lot of teams between 92 and 81 wins in the American League. It is going to be a bottleneck. Before we go, I'm going to do the trivia question, which actually has nothing to do with an American League Central team, but I came up with the other day. On opening day, 1981, the Toronto Blue Jays starting third baseman for the 1981 Toronto Blue Jays went on to have an all-star career in another sport. What player who went on to be an all-star and a champion in another sport was the starting third baseman for the 1981 Toronto Blue Jays? Put that down here, and when we're off, I'll see if you know the answer to that, Justin. Put your answer right down here. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter, or whatever they're calling it these days, and on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram, but just put your answers here and your questions here. I got a whole bunch of stuff coming on tomorrow. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ESPN deal that fell apart and ESPN's legacy on how we consume sports. I think ESPN is no longer relevant, but we must salute that they completely changed how we consumed baseball. As someone who remembers the pre-ESPN baseball days and the post-ESPN baseball days, it was a seismic change when ESPN took over. Justin, tell people where they can follow your terrific podcast.
We are at all platforms at Locked Guardians, just on Twitter, whatever they're calling these days. You can find me at JL_baseball or JL Baseball on multiple platforms as well. And we're on, YouTube and everywhere you can get podcasts.
Talking about the bottom feeding payroll, but top of the standings on the field, Cleveland, don't call them Indians, Guardians. This has been a Locked On MLB, Locked On Guardians crossover. He's Justin Lana. My name is Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.